Samutitam tatastejas Chaksurupa palambhavan Vayoscha sparsha matrad Rupam daivaritadabhut Samutitam tatastejas Chaksurupa palambhanam Vayo from air, cha and sparsha tanmatrat, which evolves from the subtle element touch. Rupam, form. Daiva iritat, according to destiny. Abhut, evolved. Samutitam, arose. Tataha, from that. Teja, fire. Chaksuhu, sense of sight. Rupa, color and form. Upalambhanam, perceiving. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. By interactions of the air and the sensation of touch, one receives different forms according to destiny. By evolution of such forms, there is fire, and the eye sees different forms in color, responsively. By interactions of the air and the sensations of touch, one receives different forms according to destiny. By evolution of such forms, there is fire, and the eye sees different forms in color. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Because of destiny, the touch sensation, the interactions of air, and the situation of the mind, which is produced of the ethereal element, one receives a body according to his previous activities. Needless to say, a living entity transmigrates from one form to another. His form changes according to destiny, and by the arrangement of superior authority, which controls the interactions of air and the mental situation. Form is the combination of different types of sense perception. Predestined activities are the plans of the mental situation and the interaction of air. Om Gyanati Mirandasya Garanjana Salakaya Chaksurun Militam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. So I think today I'll talk about what we don't know. When Prabhupada first met his Guru Maharaj, he didn't really comprehend a lot of what he was saying, according to him. He just sat there and listened. And according to Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he was very impressed by the fact that Prabhupada just sat there quietly and listened, even though he didn't understand everything. So Prabhupada indicated that we should read his books a lot. He complained, among other things, that the devotees didn't read his books. And he, every day, whether he was traveling or not traveling, he would arise at about 2 o'clock in the morning and start translating his books. So hearing is very important. And of the different types of devotional service, hearing is considered the most important one. It's even if we don't understand, we have to read and read and read again until we get a little glimpse of what the meaning is. But a little glimpse is better than nothing. So there are many different types of creatures that's mentioned in this canto. In an earlier chapter, if we have time, I'll read some of it. There are different types of creatures that exist in different countries. Like in this country, there's platypuses, kangaroos, and wallabies, and certain kinds of snakes that aren't very well known in other countries. They don't even exist in other countries. But when Prabhupada was told about the platypus, he was very amazed that it had a lot of different features of different animals. It had the body of a hippopotamus and the bill of a duck. And Prabhupada made light of this by saying that so sometimes there's different species all in one. And once he was asked, is the world round or flat? It's a very tricky question because one of Prabhupada's disciples, namely Sariputta, who had a PhD from Cornell, the late Sariputta, I should say, was able to distinguish that the earth could be flat and round at the same time. And according to higher mathematics anyway, it's something that most of us can't really understand. And one thing that Prabhupada didn't completely understand, although he understood a lot of things, was that as we go higher, time changes. That's part of relativity. And people that work in airlines, I used to travel a lot on airplanes. They said that if they're going from east to west, it's like chasing the sun. So if you go from, say, Paris to Los Angeles by your watch, it takes 9 hours. But when you get to Los Angeles, it's only seems like 4 hours have elapsed. So that's sort of chasing the sun. And if airplanes had enough fuel to continue going around and around and around the Earth, it would never become night. And so that's part of the theory of relativity, that the higher you go, the more there is time change, and it's difficult to comprehend. I think in 1977, when Prabhupada was in his nearing departure from this world, he was contacting different devotees to contact different astronomers to find out why, when we go from east to west, the time seems to change. And he was bewildered because no astronomers seemed to fit the bill. They couldn't explain how this happened, even though some of them were very well versed in astronomy. So it kind of shows you that there is such a thing as flatness and roundness being of the same thing. And there, in the fifth canto, the structures of the universe are described. And Prabhupada had some devotees make illustrations to describe what the structure of the universe is like. But he wasn't very happy with their illustrations. And he had, in later editions of the Srimad Bhagavatam, those were eliminated. And he was looking for someone who knew how the universe was structured, because it's not easy to know all these things. And it's very difficult for us, Westerners, to know about Sankhya philosophy. Just like we're reading this verse, the interactions of air and sensations of touch by interactions of the air, and sensations of touch one receives forms according to destiny. That's it's a difficult thing to comprehend. But you can if you read it over and over again. You might just get a little glimpse of it. By evolution of such forms, there is fire, and the eye sees different forms in color. So some of these things are very difficult to comprehend, and Prabhupada himself found difficulty in fully comprehending things, and he asked for very learned astronomers to explain how time could change as you go in airplanes and higher and higher destinations. So this is very common, to not know everything, and it's said that the less one knows, the more one knows. I don't know if that's a very applicable aphorism, but there's some truth in that. That the less you know, the more you know. One other point that's to this point is that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was known sometimes as the walking encyclopedia, because he had the ability to memorize whole dictionaries and encyclopedias on one reading. And he knew the whole Bhagavad Gita before he was even a teenager. He knew the whole Bhagavad Gita by heart. The interesting thing about his life is that even though he was considered kind of a genius sort of a person, or an extraordinarily gifted personality, he took initiation from Gaur-Kishore Das Babaji. And Gaur-Kishore Das Babaji, although he was a great ascetic, was functionally illiterate. According to stories, he couldn't even write his own name. And Bhaktisiddhanta decided that he wanted to take initiation, Diksha initiation from him, to the point of, he said, that he was going to commit suicide if he wasn't accepted as a bona fide disciple of Gaur-Kishore Das Babaji. And Gaur-Kishore Das Babaji did even reject him at first. And when it came to the point of saying that you either initiate me or I'm going to kill myself, he kind of relented and gave him an initiation. So that's an indication that a person's knowledge isn't based upon how much he knows or how much he's memorized or whether he's a brilliant mathematician or astronomer. It has to do with something else. Spiritual advancement, we could call it, or maybe it's an unestimable feature of some people that they have what's called spiritual advancement. How could someone like Bhaktisiddhanta take shelter of someone who is illiterate? It doesn't match up. But in another way it does, because he realized that this person was a highly advanced person, even though he was illiterate and couldn't write his own name. So we're sometimes very uncomfortable with Prabhupada's criticizing the scientists, the philosophers, and the great advances in material science that the people have made. They have airplanes, they have submarines, they have ships, and Prabhupada says that actually all these things were known to people in Vedic times. They could fly in the air without airplanes, without rumble, without noise. They had that ability. And so he kind of was dismissive of modern education and modern science. And sometimes we think that maybe Prabhupada was a little ignorant and this is all fantasy, and people who are new to Krishna consciousness think that the stories that they read about, or they're not stories, they're actual incidents that occurred in Vrindavan and other places where Krishna was present on this planet, are fictional. There's just fictional stories. They don't really exist. And Prabhupada was very determined. And even though we didn't understand everything about the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, we knew that there was something unique about Prabhupada and his way of life that made him. I mean, some people in other religions think that he was greater than some of their highly elevated Vishva avatars, or their great people like Jesus, for example. And devotees are saying that Prabhupada has manifested characteristics that are like Jesus Christ, or even greater. And some even say that he was greater because he was unfailing in his determination. And as I said, he would arise at 2 o'clock in the morning, no matter what he was doing, to translate the teachings of Srimad Bhagavatam and other books. He was very, very, very delighted when he came to America to find that they could produce his books in a very short time. One of the first books he produced when he came to the United States was Nectar of Devotion, a summary study of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. And he said that of course it's been translated nowadays, the whole thing has been translated by people who are very intelligent materially. But he said that if he translated the whole thing, it would come to about 1,000 pages. So he was being very lenient and translating it in about 400 or 500 pages as Nectar of Devotion. And when it was first available and it published in book form, Prabhupada in 1971 announced to the devotees that now he was very pleased that Nectar of Devotion was printed in such a short time. And when he was translating other books, he wanted the translating to be done very quickly. And the devotees told him, well, you're asking us to do what's impossible. And Prabhupada retorted by saying, in his expertise at rejoinder and repartee, that impossible is a word in a fool's dictionary. And nonetheless, these books were translated in a very short time. And when Prabhupada discussed what he did amongst scholars, he said, I've translated 17 volumes. That was the Chaitanya Charitamrita marathon. In a very short time, in a matter of 3 weeks or something like that. And moreover, there's no mistakes in these books, because even in books that have been published by such prestigious publishers as Oxford University Press, it's possible to find many mistakes, typos, or mistakes of proofreaders or proofs of editors. Some mistakes have been made, and they're not careful. What Prabhupada said was that his books were mistake-free. Of course, if we look carefully, we can find some grammatical differences that we don't necessarily agree with. But Prabhupada was very careful about choosing the people who would edit his work. One of the people he chose to edit his works was Jayadvaita Swami, and he was very pleased with his editing. And some other devotees that didn't carefully edit what Prabhupada wrote, or they imagined some editorial changes, were fired. And Prabhupada was very unhappy with them. One of the things that he was very unhappy was with one of the editors is when they called cow protection cows cattle. It's a very subtle kind of English change of words, but Prabhupada didn't want that done. He wanted his books preserved, and like editing, the very word editing comes, I think it comes from Latin. It comes from e out of and dit, edit, or say. It means to bring out what the author, it doesn't mean just cutting down and reducing size. I think most people think that's what editing is all about, is changing something from a 300-page book to a 200-page book. But what really editing is bringing out what the author is trying to get across in a better way than he can do. That's what good editing is. And that's, I think, what Prabhupada liked about Jayadvaita Swami's editing. We could all find things that we don't like or things that are grammatically wrong, but Prabhupada wanted it done that way. And even he states that there's a verse that he quotes, I don't know the exact Sanskrit or the exact translation, but it says that even though we don't know the English language, he used the imperial I, we, like Queen Victoria and Julius Caesar. They always said we instead of I. He said what we dislike the most is, we don't know this English language very well, but people can see that there's truth in what we're saying, what we are saying. And he gave the example of fire. If your house catches on fire and you go to the neighbors for help and you don't speak their language, they kind of can understand what's going on and they try to help. Even though they don't really know the words, they try to help. So that's a very important example of why we liked Prabhupada, because he could bring teachings that were very esoteric, very difficult to understand, and very remote and unusual, by giving practical everyday examples like that. And one was of the earth being flat, which is thought to be a very fictional kind of primitive way of looking at the universe, was that he would say that when we're traveling, and he used this example, when we're traveling from Paris to Los Angeles, it seems like by watch it's taking 9 hours. But actually when we get there, it's only taken 4 hours. So he was kind of giving a practical example of, and then the other example that I've kind of learned myself is that sometimes people who work on airplanes say that they call it chasing the sun. That, when you're going from east to west, the time changes. And so it's all very practical, and that's one of the things that endured Prabhupada, that we didn't understand a lot of the stuff that was in these books, and like this verse here is a very difficult thing to understand. By interactions of the air and sensations of touch, one receives different forms according to destiny. Very difficult thing. You can read that several times and not contemplate the actual meaning of it. Sankhya philosophy is although in parts of the world it's considered to be very important way of philosophizing about the world is to understand basic Sankhya philosophy. But Prabhupada told us that in days of yore you could travel in outer space. And he used the example of 8.4 million species of life several times, and what each species is all about. And that sometimes we think that there's overpopulation. That's a very popular theory, that there's overpopulation. There's not going to be enough food for people to eat. But even when I was, before I was a devotee, I used to travel a lot on airplanes, and flying over the United States, 90% of the land was just unoccupied. There weren't any people. So I was thinking, how could the world be overpopulated? And according to the 8.4 million species of life, there are more animals than there are people. And I read some statistics in one place that said that there are more in New York City, that there are more rats than there are people. And well, that's a kind of gruesome aphorism or statistic, but I think there's a lot of truth in it. You don't see the rats, but they're there. They're all over. They're underground. They're in the subways. They're around. So there's a lot more insects than people, and a lot more fish, and if you go to Africa and you see all these very strange looking animals, but there's so many of them, and all especially in South Africa, they're everywhere. Whether they're impalas or elephants or gnus or wildebeest or whatever they are, they're everywhere. So it's important to pursue something, even though we don't completely understand it, and that's what Krishna consciousness is all about. It's like we're sitting here listening to lectures or worshiping deities, and we don't know how it's possible, but somehow we're doing it, because we know that if we persist, that we're going to succeed. And Prabhupada is an example of someone who succeeded. So are there any questions about this? Yes. Ron.
Thank you so much, Maharaj. I completely take your point about trying to screw meaning out of some of these words. They're almost inconceivable.
There are people, I mean, even Sadhaputta, who is he had a PhD from Cornell, which is a red brick university. He even said that he didn't understand a lot of it. And there's a description of an entity called the Kim Purusha, and Sadhaputta said that means, what is it a human? So it's a very difficult thing to understand that there are 400,000 species of human beings, and some of them have 4 arms. And it just defies the laws of physics that you can have one shoulder or 2 shoulders and 4 arms, 2 arms coming out of each shoulder. But they exist.
I was just wondering, near the end of today's purport, where Prabhupada talks about predestined activities, could you comment on that?
Well, yeah, that's a very moot point, whether predestiny or free will exists. And when I was in a class, we spent the entire class time debating whether events shape people or people shape events, whether everything is predestined or whether we have free will. And Prabhupada, in a way, kind of ameliorated this eternal question by saying that, of course, we have free will. And he gave the example of driving an automobile. And if you drive an automobile on the right side of the road going forward in this country, you're using your free will, but it's very dangerous. So you have free will, but it's limited. Everyone has free will, but we have a limitation. And he used the example of an automobile, that we can use free will, but if we do it wrongly, if we use our free will in the wrong way, it's very dangerous. Like skating on thin ice. So that kind of solved the question of do we have free will, or is everything predestined? It's a very difficult question that's argued back and forth in even higher institutions of the world like Harvard and Cambridge and on Columbia, Harvard.
Anyone else?
Sounds interesting, so much for us. You told that Prabhupada was writing his books every day. He raised up around 2 in the morning and was writing his books, and it's very important for us to read. But my question is how to develop this habit to read daily, a lot of time, not just 20 minutes or half an hour, but maybe more, and how much time devotees should spend on reading Prabhupada books daily.
Well, his objection was that he spent so much time, 1 or 2 hours in the middle of the night, making these books available in a language that it wasn't his first language, because he knew that when he came to the United States, he had to translate these books into the English language. So it wasn't a habit, it was a kind of determination that he knew this was a very important science, Krishna consciousness, and it had to be made available to the English-speaking world. And it wasn't exactly a habit, it was an example of using free will in the best possible way. He was very determined to see that the millions of people that existed in another country, although they were very advanced materially, they were very primitive in many ways. And he just was very determined that they should learn what Krishna consciousness is all about. So he was it wasn't sort of a habit, it was a principle of determination. That developed into a habit, of course, but he did it every single day that I knew him.
Yeah, but for us, how much time should we spend on reading Srila Prabhupada books daily?
Well, I think personally that it's very important that we read the books every day, and I make it ask people that when I was initiating people into Diksha, I asked them to read. It wasn't a vow, but it was a promise to read at least 30 pages every day of Prabhupada's books, and in the next 10 years that they could do that. I made that a stipulation, and it's a very difficult thing to do because. Of course, there's a lot of white space in these books between the purports and the translations. There's less now than there was before, but it's a task. So, in addition to chanting 16 rounds, a principle is to read every day of your life, and because that's what these books are for. They're for us to read. I guess. I mean, I'm sure. I'm not guessing, but I'm convinced of that.
Thank you so much.
Yes?
Hare Krishna Maharaj, Maharaj, you mentioned that hearing is the most effective process out of the 9 devotional process. Kindly, if you can explain how does one develop the hearing to be most effective we can use in our bhakti?
Well, I think the best way to follow the principle of hearing is to read, because reading is like hearing. And of course, I'm 83 years old. I can't even hold a book hardly, but I have people read to me, and I hear it every day for 2 hours. And that's my version of reading. And I think it's important for all of us to even though we don't comprehend everything, and I think it's best to read Prabhupada's books. Of course, there are many other books to read, but if you read these books, there's new life with each reading. Whereas if you read books about astronomy or books about psychology or zoology, you don't necessarily get the same. You get a little bit of more knowledge as you read more continually, but Prabhupada's books are different. You get a new meaning each time you read it. That's my opinion.
So Maharaj, Srila Prabhupada also said that when we chant the mantra, we should hear every word we chant. Is that linked to controlling the mind as well?
Yes. And Prabhupada mentioned several times that thinking was important. And when there was a contradiction in scriptural writings between whether there was a time when Draupadi and Yudhisthira were on one side and Bhishma and Krishna and Arjuna were on the other side. It had to do with her young children being killed in their sleep. And her point was that Aswatthama is the son of a Brahmin, and the son of a Brahmin, according to a scriptural injunction, cannot be killed. And according to Bhishma, because he was a murderer, and Arjuna, who was a warrior, that he had to be killed because he committed murder. And the devotees believe in capital punishment. So Krishna had to be the reconciler of these two different things, and so it involved thinking. And the way it involved thinking was he asked Arjuna, he said, you have to use your sharp intelligence to decide how to kill him and not kill him at the same time. And that's exactly what Krishna did.
Thank you, Maharaj.
So thinking is very important. And to chant mindlessly is not a good thing. To control the mind while we're chanting and to listen to the sound of each syllable is very, very important. So any other comments? Yes?
I've heard it said that if you do things by force, it's very difficult.
You heard it said what? I didn't hear you.
If you do things by force, like your service or chanting, it's very hard to maintain it. It has to be done out of love. So how do we develop?
Well, psychologically, it's been said that things should not be done by force. They should be done by natural sort of, evolution. And so there's some truth in that. But controlling the mind means to engage some element of force. You have to force yourself to do certain things. You have to force yourself to not do certain things. Like yesterday was Ekadasi, so we had to force ourselves not to eat grains, even though we were very hungry for them. But we had to force ourselves, even though someone put a big pizza that was very luscious looking in front of us, we had to force ourselves not to eat it. And so sometimes force has benefits in spiritual life. It's not necessarily the way to go for in psychological circles, but it has its benefits. So I think we'll stop there. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
ISKCON Mukunda Maharaj Ji.